everyone. Welcome to DevOps Decrypted, where we talk all things DevOps. I'm your host, Laura Larimore. I'm here with our Adaptavist panel today. We have Jobin and Matt from Adaptavist, and we have Nelson with Adaptavist. We're going to go around a little bit and introduce ourselves. We also have Frank Merla today as a guest on our podcast. He's from BetaNXT. We did a case study with him that was very interesting for Adaptavist, so we'd like to talk about that a little bit today. I'm Laura. I'm your host. I don't think that I've ever actually properly introduced myself on this podcast. I am a developer from Adaptavist, so I'm the developer in DevOps. So let's go around. Let's talk about a little bit about what we do here and why we're here on this podcast today, just to kick it off. So let's go with Jobin. We'll start there, and we'll just go around.
Sounds great. So my name is Jobin. I'm the head of DevOps here at Adaptavist. We do all things DevOps, not just the dev in DevOps, but everything combined. And I had the special privilege to work with Frank on this BetaNXT project. And so I'm happy that Frank is here to talk more about it. And I hope that our listeners will have an opportunity to take away some good things about out of this case study and how we did things BetaNXT.
So my name's Matt. I work for the Adaptavist CTO, John, who's often on this podcast. Unfortunately, he can't be here today. So I help with internal DevOps initiatives. So Adaptavist is a big company now. Jobin does such great work with our customers. I attempt to do the same with my customers, which is the rest of Adaptavist. So yeah, that's me.
Name is Nelson Jordan. I've been with Adaptavist for about close to nine and a half years now. My current role is a global account director, which Frank and BetaNXT are part of that domain. And our goal is to help our valued customers grow both breadth and depth and be that trusted value partner. And luckily, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of working with Frank for the last 2 years in helping them grow and helping them transform their business. Thank you so much. And I'll hand it over to Frank to introduce himself.
All right. Well, I've had the pleasure of working with Jobin and Nelson on this call. It's a pleasure to meet you, Laura and Matt, and Adaptavist. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast. It's definitely it's a first for me for being on a podcast, so I just want to call that out. So it's an absolute pleasure. My background, I am the enterprise solutions architect at BetaNXT. Frank Merla, we've been working together since 2023, I think is when we started our journey. And I also have some consulting background as well, not just on the client side. So I've had over about a decade of experience at my past employer at Capco. So it's nice to be on the client side of things. I would say, with this new experience being at BetaNXT and working with Adaptavist, all around it's been fantastic. I know we're going to talk a lot about what we've done together with the PDLC and the tooling changes that we've done and all that evolution that Jobin and Nelson have been working so hard alongside with us at BetaNXT. So very excited. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Frank. So to kick things off, one quick question. Digital transformation, it's always a hard thing to do. And, to get buy-in from everybody in the company, that's what we always advise, right? To get buy-in from the top stakeholders all the way down to the developers on the field. How did you manage to do that at BetaNXT?
So that is the hardest question. I mean, I think when you start talking about transformation and at the top of the house, the first thing you think about is transformation is efficiency, cost cutting. How do we become as efficient as possible and provide the most value in the most efficient way and in a cheap way, but still not losing any of that great functionality that you've been providing your clients for some time. And when you go through any type of change, you're changing tooling, you're changing process. It's like that old consulting way. You have to look at everything with people, process, and tooling. The people part is the hardest part because when you're going through change transformation, it's easy to write things down on paper. It's easy to put nice big fluff words in there for a client to see and see all the value you're getting with new tooling. But sometimes you forget about how people are actually going to adopt change and how well they're going to be able to adopt change, and the history of whether or not that they had to go through that change is also a critical component to where you have to start thinking about how you approach these things. And I think the hardest part that we had working alongside with Adaptavist and trying to go through that transformation with people is each business unit was different. Some business units were easily adapted and ready to change and willing to change, and they wanted to change. And that's very different to some other business units we had that were a little bit more hesitant, They were doing things in a specific way for quite some time. They've been working for them, so why change? That's kind of like anything from a human standpoint when you're trying to ask even your grandparent to do something different on your phone, and they say, "What are you talking about? I don't know why I have to do it like this. Why can't I just do it the same old way I normally do? I'd rather call someone. I don't want to text," right? It goes hand in hand in the same world that we're working in our industry. If they have a process that's been working for quite some time, how do you show them the value? And the biggest thing that we did to ensure that we had folks understand, number one, what are we doing? And also start to get excited about what we're doing and adopt it, was to establish a proper governance in place. And what we did at BetaNXT was we created a center of excellence. And what we did there was help govern how we were going to change, how we were going to communicate those changes, and how we were going to collaborate with all three business units that we had at BetaNXT as part of that process. And I think the main piece that's probably most important, Jobin, is making sure that the individuals that are changing are part of that change process. And I think that's where at other organizations it can fall short very quickly. As an individual and as a human being, if I'm told you need to stop the way you're working today and do it this way, my first question is why? Or when did this come about? Why wasn't I involved earlier? And now I immediately have a barrier set up. And the hardest part as consultants and as clients is how do you break through that barrier? And by doing that, we did establish a center of excellence. We did first make sure that our communication channels were open. Our executive leadership were completely bought into what we were doing. And we were communicating what was changing on a very frequent basis. And those changes involved the individuals that were being impacted.
A sports analogy.
There we go.
A coach was talking about something that changed his career, and he went from being transactional to being transformational, and that meant getting the players to buy in because he wanted something good for them versus something good for himself. Do you think that in going through these transformations that you were able to find ways to get people to buy in because they were able to see, hey, getting into this technology is good for me, not just good for these guys up in the C-suite or these shareholders or, this bottom line that, I care about a little bit, but I need something that's going to benefit what I'm doing on the day to day. You know what I mean?
No, you hit the nail on the head, Laura. It's exactly what we had to achieve at BetaNXT. And in order to do that, we really need to show the value of what's changing for them. What are they getting out of it? And I like to call it the roadshow. It's almost like the internal roadshow. I know salespeople know all about roadshows, going out there, pitching your products to clients and getting them to buy in. You have to do the same thing internally. You have to show them what's changing, how is it changing, and why are we changing it? What type of output are you going to get? How is it going to make their day-to-day easier? How is it more efficient? And that's what we had to make sure that we not only did consistently, but we embedded it into our process within the Center of Excellence. So as we go through this transformation and change at any stage in the life cycle of the PDLC, we have to design it, we have to solution it together with the people that are being impacted. And then we go through and actually configure it in a sandbox environment so we can do something that I call seeing is believing, and present it and showcase what exactly is it that we are developing, why are we doing it, and what's the impact to the individuals that are going to potentially use this new process. And when you're able to showcase the value to them in person of what it looks like in the tooling, and also make sure they understand that they have handholding to be a part of that journey of that transformation, the training aspect. And training, I think, was actually a huge key to this too. And I think we should talk about that at some point in this podcast of how we went about training internally at BetaNXT. Because I think the way that we did it with videos and the types of videos that we did, the segmentation of the videos, it was a way for users to jump in and learn if they might not have been a part of the meetings that were in those roadshow sessions, and being available for those drop-in sessions to explain it even further. So the hand-holding was important, but just like you said, if you want those players on the field to be a part of that transformation, you need to show it to them. They need to be involved with it. They also need to have the ability to provide feedback if they don't like what you're showing in the roadshow. And when you're taking feedback in from those individuals, they finally feel heard. then they see the output of what those changes may be, and the probability of them adopting it is going to go up. And that's probably the biggest factor with any change transformation, regardless if you're doing it with software, it's any aspect of consulting. If you're in regulatory, if you're in capital markets, wealth management, it is the only thing and the most important thing in my eyes, in my tenure, that helped me achieve success in any of my projects outside of BetaNXT as well.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that you mentioned there. One is that proof of value, what we call POV. We do that with a lot of customers, and we have done that with BetaNXT as well. That's great because, and then you also mentioned a little bit about, people getting excited about the change, right? And that is very important. We have to identify those people who can actually get excited about this upcoming change. We use them in the POV, and then we make sure that, okay, we show that value to the rest of the company. And that is something that we have successfully done at BetaNXT. And that is something I have seen working very well in some other customer engagements as well. I think, if we can get them excited, I think wonders will happen.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Jobin, I mean, whenever we had a gap in what we were trying to produce for the POV or the MVP or whatever it was that we're designing to improve the way of working, Adaptavist had a subject matter expert to come in and bridge that gap. And I think that's a key came in for working with a company like Adaptavist is you're not going to know everything. The client's not going to know everything. I'm sure that as you go to different clients, you deal with different personalities, and even if they're not senior, sometimes you have conflict because they think that their way is the only way, it's the best way until they actually see another way of working. So, and can speak to another subject matter expert that's at the same level or higher. And I think that's where Adaptavist really shined is if we had challenges that we had to face internally, we were able to bring in those subject matter experts from Adaptavist.
Well, thank you for saying that. Other solution providers are available, but no, we're the best. Anyway,
That's right.
Yes, just wanted to pick up on a few things there. And just while you were speaking, Frank, there's so much good stuff in that. And I'm not just saying that because Adaptavist did it. But a lot of it just maps pretty directly onto some of the ways that we see other people undergoing transformations and doing that in a good way. We start talking about things like digital transformation, and it almost suggests a big uniform plan that's going to have drastic effects. And I think it's often underestimated the amount of work that you have to do to get people to do it and to get people to buy into it. I was also minded of, as you were speaking, of Gene Kim's 5 ideals. Especially he talks about locality and simplicity in terms of what people actually need to be able to do their job well. And yeah, we go in with a digital transformation with various goals of, saving money, making development process more efficient, more safe, etc. If you can't actually install that locality and treat all the individual groups as individuals, then you're not going to get anywhere. And you need to cut these things down and make them simple, and make them relevant to the people involved. And I'm really glad that we were able to do that.
Yeah, we always try to start with that lens of trying to keep it simple. I mean, the less clicks and the less confusion, the more likely they're going to adopt it. Whether or not it may be simple to you is completely different than another user. So there's also some emotional intelligence you have to have for yourself of how do you think they're going to actually perceive what you just built? Do you think that they're going to be open to it? Just because for you doing it maybe 2 or 3 clicks, it's easy enough, for somebody else that might be too complicated. So, agreed.
Yeah, and you get into realms of things like figuring out how you treat. So you're providing a platform effectively. You had a couple of clicks, and I think the modern way of doing this, and I believe this is how we tried with you to implement this at BetaNXT is to treat internal customers as if they're external customers. And so it's not, if you go into a situation like this and try and dictate and say, no, you're going to have to do it like this now, it's inevitable it's going to go wrong. And so, sitting down with lots of people, lots of user studies, how people interact with systems, what they actually really need. And again, bringing those requirements to the table in a more formal and structured way. It feels like a hell of a lot of work, but it's absolutely essential, I think, to do this stuff.
That's actually something that, I mean, you guys did a fantastic job when it came to the first step in this process was figuring out what tooling. And, you know, if we were changing tooling across the board with the 3 different business units we had. And I mean, just off the top of my head, I know we had SVN, we had Maven, we had Jenkins, we had Docker, we had Bitbucket. So Jira and Confluence, they were being used at most of the business units, but some business units were using some of Jira, not all of Jira. And going through that discovery and identifying what would make the most sense for BetaNXT based off of our products and services that we're delivering to our clients is really where Adaptavist shined. That was a value you guys, I would say, in the forefront brought to the table where it kind of, I mean, our CTO said, aha, okay, great, this makes sense. Yes, we understand the value of the tools that you're recommending. It's scalable, it's flexible, and you know, when you choose the types of tools, when you make that final decision of what are we going to be leveraging for our target state tool set, the what has been answered, then the hardest part is the how, and that's where Adaptavist also came in and helped us with the Center of Excellence stand up and the PDLC defining it so we can get that MVP out the door and prove that it works. And it is working right now, and we're actually enhancing it, and it's going through an evolution of changes to improve it across the board. So yeah, kudos to you guys, because I mean, I know that was the hardest part, and that took some time to actually go through that discovery and dig deep into why did those individual business units choose those past tools and what other services they are providing, and then look at it holistically thereafter and give that eagle eye view of, okay, now what's the right path forward so we can set them up for success and set them up for scale, because BetaNXT is a growing business.
It is indeed. And earlier you said the hardest question is answering the people part, right? But again, when it comes to a company like yours and with the size and the scale that you have, you mentioned about some of the tools that you already named, but there are complex legacy systems in almost all big enterprises like yours, right? And, you know, integrating these legacy systems or migrating them over to a new stack, it's never an easy process. Obviously, you have to get over the people hurdle. You have to get buy-in from all the folks, but that's just the beginning of the journey. Once you have done that, yes, you identify the current state, you identify the future state, but to get there, to navigate through all that technical challenges, it's not an easy task either, isn't it?
Yeah, and you guys did a fantastic job with that when we were working on it. And you're right, because when you start looking at tooling and you take a look at actually what's behind the scenes of a legacy platform, I mean, you see things that scare you sometimes. The number of issue types, workflow schemas, metadata that's in there, who's using what, the project container setups, how are they linking their dev tooling to their work management tooling. It sometimes, depending on what you find, it starts throwing you curveballs, and you have to be ready to pivot. And it sometimes will adjust what your target state actually was. So being able to being able to adjust on the fly, being able to pivot. And then when you actually start going into those details and you have to document it efficiently and have the right templates in place so you can actually go through that analysis in an efficient way, I think that's really where you guys helped us out tremendously with that.
Yeah, I even just taking on a legacy like changeover is so difficult. I have friends that they work on like a legacy code base where it's like 1,500 lines of Java and it's like until it breaks, we're not moving it, because it's too much to try to even take on. So even trying to take on some of these legacy systems, because you really don't know what cobwebs you're getting into until you get in there. So that challenge of trying to do that, once you've got everybody in, they're like, okay, we're in. What are we into? So I would like to hear more about how that went once you got into there.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the complexity, I mean, we had to take we took our roadmap and we had to adjust it a bit, right? I mean, I think when we look at certain business units at BetaNXT, they were more complex than others, right? So we took somewhat of a phased approach of onboarding one of the business units first with our MVP model within the PDLC that was our proof of concept, right? That was our first test. even though we ran pilots beforehand to ensure that it was successful for that one business unit, it's still a way that you can prove that it works to the other business units that might still be skeptical because they know that they have processes that have been involved or created back in the early 2000s, and it works and there's code behind it. And why change it? It's going to risk if we do this with a client. But if you're able to do that and showcase the value with that PDLC with the first business unit and see how is it impacting our clients within that business unit, then great, voila, we want to adopt this. It's something that a client is seeing. It's improved our experience dramatically by going into the ServiceNow portal and being able to collaborate directly with our relationship managers compared to how we used to do it in the past, which would be an email, right? Going back and forth and what are the requirements, the functional specs, and then having sidebar conversations with the architecture team. That leads to potential inefficiencies in how we're actually giving a client experience that really isn't as optimal as it should be. So, that's the client experience side of things that I would say of how we really approach it, just going phased approach, start with the business unit that's ready to adopt it. And then that proof of concept now becomes proof on not only how it improves our client experience, but then also you have to remember that there's internal KPIs and how are we improving internally from an efficiency perspective? How do you gauge and measure whether or not your intake process is improving? Your cycle time during delivery is starting to shorten a bit and starting to level out. That transparency isn't going to be there if you don't have a standard way of working, or at least define the KPIs that you need, define the durable teams that we have on the ground and how they're going to interact with requests coming in through intake. And also try to put toll gates in place is one of the things that we did in intake to ensure that we're not over consuming time of our sales team and our product team and our architecture team with going through a full work breakdown structure of every request that comes through the pipeline, right? So there's certain toll gates that you have to define to try to improve efficiencies, not only just on the delivery side, but how the hell are we going to assess what our clients are asking us? Should we be devoting so much time and effort and energy? And that time, effort, and energy has a cost associated with it. So by putting these standardized ways of working, especially in the intake side of things, it also does help with the cost savings, even though you might not be able to put an actual figure against it. But your subject matter experts are now able to focus their time on more valuable things if a request comes in that they shouldn't even be assessing it if it's not even part of the product roadmap, right? And I think in the past, they were looking at everything and trying to break it down and seeing can they deliver it before even deciding should we be delivering it.
The return of investment is actually a funny thing. You mentioned about, people talking about are they actually realizing the value? But obviously, at the end of the day, it's when you start really innovating, not worrying about the intricacies of the tools and, the processes, that's when you're actually returning that value, right? So obviously, yes, you cannot put a finger on on a particular change that we made and say this saved us X amount of dollars. But at the end of the day, you're still realizing value because you're innovating faster, you're getting your product to the customers faster, and you're not worrying about, the tool problems that you were worrying about earlier.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we define the KPIs. One of the first things we did, even before I joined BetaNXT, the C-suite executives like Don Henderson, they were going through rigorous review sessions. I believe with Adaptavist as well, to talk about what types of KPIs do we want to achieve? How can we see whether or not the trends are improving or not? And that was a big driver as to what type of information were we looking to capture in intake and during delivery, right? Because those KPIs are going to determine what type of metadata you need, what type of workflow statuses during intake. That was a critical component. And you're right, that's where you actually do see the value. If you're able to deliver faster to clients, provide a streamlined, a more consistent way of interacting with your clients, you're improving the client experience, you're improving your delivery time. And then it also helps with retention of your own workforce, right? Because they know what they're doing on a day-to-day. It is defined. There's a more efficient onboarding process. They understand their roles and responsibilities. And sometimes if you jump into any type of company where it's too fast-paced, employees might feel a little bit overwhelmed, and then you start having flight risk, which, this is a way to also mitigate that as well.
There is a recent developer experience user game in the town, and I think, Matt, you just recently had a webinar or a LinkedIn talk where you talked extensively about developer experience.
Yeah, it's critically important. I mean, we spent a number of years going through the process of working out how we get software imagined, developed, produced, operated effectively, and called it DevOps. I think it's very easy to forget about you, Laura, the developers in the DevOps. And I'm liking that we now have a bit of an initiative to do this sort of thing. And yeah, it ties into what you were saying, Frank, about the cognitive overhead that we put on devs these days with so many different systems, even if they're best of breed and chosen for all the right reasons, there's still so many paper cuts in that world. And most developers I speak to, they don't care about things like cloud services or containers or lambdas, etc., or firewalls, VPNs, security groups, all that sort of stuff. Or even having to install 17 million different things on their laptop before they can write an application. Shining a light on that and looking at, how do we, we've gone through all the hard work here of providing guardrails, providing standardized ways of doing things through, a long transformational project. If we're not putting our eyes, if we're not putting our feet in the shoes of the developers, get my metaphor right there, then we're not going to get started. People are going to churn. It's all very well. We've got a platform there, but if we haven't got the right tools, even the right processes, if we're not looking at how they actually deliver value, then it's for nothing. And yes, I'm glad that we managed to put in something that speaks to those concerns.
It's not just a developer churn. I mean, obviously that's a big part of it, and developer experience is a huge thing now. But even when it comes to strategic partnerships, between vendors and customers and, the partners that work on these kind of engagements, again, an important factor is their experience through it. And I remember Nelson being, the main person talking to BetaNXT as well as Adaptavist. Obviously, he's part of Adaptavist, but being that partner is an important thing. Nelson, do you want to talk a little bit about, your experience on this particular project and how that partnership actually blossomed?
Will do. It was an interesting dynamics, right? So when we first started, Joe, and I believe I brought you at the very beginning as well, is we looked at it as BetaNXT came to assist from a tool perspective, right? This is pre-Frank days, Frank before he joined the team, is we looked at it as a tool perspective, and we took a step back, and we said, you know what? This really is not a tool engagement. You're transforming your business, right? You're incorporating 3 different business units into one business unit. So from the very onset, we took a step back from an account perspective and looked at what is the business needs, what is the strategy, what are they looking at to do strategically, and we came around to saying that this is really a transformational. And that actually helped us assemble the team more from a transformation perspective. We brought in Rodney, who was a really high-level system architect, to take a look at it from a high level, and now from a purely Atlassian tool base. And then what we looked at is we changed our infrastructure or organization to take on more of an account perspective-centric model. Right. So where we had myself as the strategic architect, now working directly with the client and working directly with our internal teams, ensuring everything gets done from a quality perspective and integration, and basically being there for the client whenever they had any concerns. I know, Frank.
I have to interject here because it was literally like that. There were times when I was actually suspecting Nelson was working for BetaNXT. Being the delivery head, because Nelson always used to speak on behalf of the customer, and that actually helped immensely in this transformational engagement. And I'm glad he did that, and I'm sure, Frank, you are as well. because that plays in a key role, because you always have to think about the problems that the customer is facing, right? And work together to solve those problems. And that was an important part of our success, I guess.
At times I felt like Frank was at joint to the hip, right? How many times have we had those conversations 9, 10 o'clock in the evening, around potential concerns, right? And what I really love about the relationship is the client had a concern or perceived a concern, and we quickly mitigated that problem instead of waiting it to fester, right? That was highly successful.
Yep. You guys did a fantastic job with being able to pivot on the fly. If we did hit a challenge or a roadblock, we were able to adjust quickly. So I think that's critical when you're going through this transformation effort, is if a change is needed, and it will, right? Depending on who's on the ground and the type of subject matter expertise you might need for the next phase of the project, you have to make a change quick, right? You got to bring in the right people. Not saying that there were any wrong people, but just saying that the skill sets that were needed as we were going through this entire journey, they were constantly evolving, they were changing. So we had to bring in those skill sets to make sure that we were successful. And Nelson was attached to the hip. I'm just waiting for Nelson to sign the contract. I sent him to work at BetaNXT, so we'll
get your hands off his arse.
Hey, Frank, I did want to touch one thing, and I know we're coming close to the top of the hour, right? We know that this was a huge transformational engagement, right, which brought its own issues and concerns and challenges, right, especially on the people. But one of the major cores that was always on our back of the mind was the decision that we had to get off a certain environment because there was fees associated with that. Huge penalties.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the impact that had around the transformation in the team.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of where, when you're trying to figure out what your roadmap and your plan is of what needs to get done first, and I think we tried to touch on it a little bit earlier, was, obviously the top of the house at any organization, they care about cost. How are you going to save money? How are we going to see what it looks like on the bottom line? And you obviously can't be paying for licenses with both your legacy platforms and the target state tooling set that you're bringing in at the same time. It's just, it'll be at the company's detriment, because you're going to be paying for two tool sets doing the same thing. So the priority became quickly for us to migrate off of those legacy platforms, those legacy tools, and get into the target state. So we almost had to take an approach of, can we do this with a lift and shift and bring them into the target state tooling, and then bring them into the PDLC standard way of working, and make sure they have the right proper training to do it in a nice phased approach to where we didn't put any of the business at risk. And I think that was the main goal. And yeah, so like any other company, priorities change. Executives will come down and say, hey, work on XYZ initiative. And then tomorrow they say, put that on hold. This is the next top priority. But yes, cost was number one. Getting off those legacy tools was the first thing that we had to do. But we knew that we couldn't slow down defining what the PDLC actually was. So as this is kind of where, in order to ensure that you're not falling behind, you do have to follow the directive of getting off those legacy tools, but you can't fall behind when you're defining what the standardized PDLC is going to be. So you have to move things in parallel at sometimes, but you also have to really push things a lot faster. And getting off the tool set into our target state tooling was the top priority. We did that successfully, and we achieved that much sooner than expected. I think we did it 6 months before, I believe, we were at the original target date.
It was great that we could achieve it. Now, you mentioned about pivoting quite a few times already. And, it's also true because, technology never stops evolving. And we have seen, like in the last 1 year, obviously I have to mention the word AI here. So the last 1 year, AI technologies have been coming out, and that changed the game for a lot of the companies. And I can already see that BetaNXT is not stopping. They're still evolving, and they're looking at all these greatest and latest technologies. And do you want to speak a little bit more about how we are looking at AI, the evolution of AI, and probably similar things in the technology world these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, and one of the benefits of working for a company that's owned by a private equity firm is the benefit to work fast and to adopt fast. And especially with technology, I mean, you can see how much AI is evolving and how fast it's evolving. And it's evolving at a rate that is, sometimes it could be scary to some people. So It is actually very much a part of our strategy and what we're doing at BetaNXT from an AI perspective is trying to get AI embedded into our ecosystem in a way that it's going to improve the way that we're operating internally and figure out how we can improve how the client experience is going to be impacted as well with AI. As part of those initiatives, you have to make sure that you take into account security as the number one aspect when you're talking about AI. How are you embedding it into your ecosystem? What type of AI are you embedding into your ecosystem? Is there any vulnerabilities possibly that would be involved if you were to implement AI into your tooling? So we take those things very seriously at BetaNXT. So before we ever make any decisions on any type of AI solutions, we always ensure that we have a complete assessment from a security and vulnerability standpoint first. So we are definitely taking it seriously. We are looking at leverage AI. We're doing it right now at the moment with Copilot at BetaNXT, and it's been showing a ton of results when it comes to improving the efficiencies of everything that we're doing across from having meeting minutes completely captured to where you don't need to have a PM on every call documenting meeting minutes and having those next steps and action items captured. It does a great job in that area. So it helps us to work faster. And I think that in the speed at which we have to work at BetaNXT, it's essential to our success. It helps us actually deliver faster when those execs come together and say, hey, we want you to focus on this new initiative. The AI tooling, it helps us get there at that timeline that they were originally expecting. And I think that's kind of where the biggest value is.
Appreciate that. It's always helpful to be a little more efficient. As we wrap up, let's go ahead and give a little bit of our final takeaways here. So let's kick that off with Matt. Do you have any final takeaways for our audience?
Yeah, I'm just going to riff on one of the last things that Frank said, which is he's now in a position where his execs can come to him with something that they need to do, and they can go and get that delivered better, faster, safer, etc. Yes, A1 result.
Absolutely. Jobin?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we talked a lot about, the role of Adaptavist in this particular transformation, but I have to say one of the major takeaways for me from this engagement was the fact that, we had somebody like Frank on the other side of the fence, right? It's always good to have a stakeholder with a customer who is invested in this journey, right? Who is ready to work with a partner and be part of the journey. I think that is very important when it comes to transformation, any transformations. We need, because it's a partnership at the end of the day. You cannot actually rely on one team to deliver success. You have to work together and deliver success. And if you have people like Frank on the other side of the fence, it actually helps with that journey. So I'll just say thanks to Frank.
Yeah, thank you, Jobin. And just I one call out that I have to make that's extremely critical for change transformation is you need to have champions across the client organization that are going to be along with you for that journey. You need to find people that are passionate about change, that are passionate about making their jobs more efficient and the people around them. If you don't have that, it's going to be extremely stressful and impossible. And I know that goes back to the people thing in the beginning of this podcast conversation, but I can't stress it enough that, at BetaNXT, we have champions across each of the business units that are ready for change. They want the change. They're driven. They take part of the center of excellence. They're bought into it. And they all have their stamp in what we've defined. And that is extremely critical. So I need to give a shout out to BetaNXT as a whole for actually being champions of this journey that we've gone along with Adaptavist with. And that is one of the biggest advocates for why we've been successful so far.
A lot of people on the podcast always hear me say it comes down to your people. Your people matter. Nelson, your takeaway?
Just to what Frank said, right? So before Frank came on, we had challenges of finding those influences within BetaNXT, right? We had our top senior executives, but we all know it's a top-down and bottom-up approach, right? So when Frank came on, he brought that bottom-up approach and allowed us to facilitate the influence across BetaNXT. So Frank, I don't know how but you came across at a critical juncture. Right? Technology is great, is easy, right? It gets done. The people part that we really had trouble at the beginning was resolved when you came in and you allowed us to get in touch with those influences and make this transformation a lot easier. So for that, I'd like to thank you.
I love a good story. And I appreciate that this podcast today has been a good story of transformation, because you took us through the beginning with getting the buy-in, and then down to the dealing with the costs and dealing with what it takes to move from legacy systems and what it takes to do all of this and what determines the outcome and what is the outcome of a transformation and how that story weaves together. So I appreciate that. This has been a good podcast. I've enjoyed it.
According to Gartner, 70% of the transformational projects fail. So there's a reason this one is a successful one, and I hope our listeners will take something good away from it. And I 100% agree with you, Laura. It's a good story. I'm glad to be part of it, and we all are.
Yeah, it's a great story. I think it hinges on the people. I really do. I will always live and die on that hill that the people matter. So for DevOps Decrypted, and Jobin, Matt, myself, and Nelson, and our wonderful guest today, Frank Merla from BetaNXT, this has been DevOps Decrypted in the Adaptavist Podcast Network. Appreciate you listening. We'll see you next time. Thank you guys, and we're out.